Okay, so today we're going to talk about domain and range. This is something that we looked at today in class, but these are very good examples of domain and range in general, so it never hurts to look at these again. We're going to start by working on the back of the notes. We're going to start specifically by labeling our x and our y in our graph since they're not labeled. And if you remember to that little chart that we talked about earlier in the year, x and y went to the doctor, but they couldn't be seen because they didn't have an ID. X is our domain, so I'm going to write domain under x. And y is our range, so I'm going to write range next to our y. And we're going to start by looking at our domain, which is the x values that we use to create this graph. But before we do that, let's talk about the arrows in this parabola. The arrows mean that this parabola is going to keep going and going and going and going. It's going to keep going on to infinity. So if you think about it, you can kind of you can extend this to look something like this, upwards and also downwards because we have an arrow pointing down. So our parabola is actually going to keep, if you look at our x value, it's going to start at 3, but it's going to keep going and going and going, so it's going to use up all the x values. More specifically, our parabola starts with 3 on the x-axis, and then it goes to positive infinity because our x values keeps going on forever and ever. So if we try to write this in terms of a domain, we're going to have 3 and positive infinity, and our x, any value that we're looking for in terms of our range, is going to either be 3 or greater than 3, and it's going to be less than or equal to positive infinity. Again, it's positive infinity because our parabola is going to continue on forever and ever in the positive direction. Okay, so now let's talk about our range. We're going to start by highlighting the y values that we use. And in this problem, because our parabola continues on upwards forever, our range, or the y values that we're going to use are going to be all the y's going up. In other words, all the y's going to positive infinity. And because it's going to go on forever and ever downwards, we are going to use all of the y's going down. So in other words, our parabola is going to go on to negative infinity in terms of the y's. And if we try to write this in terms of range, our y is going to go from negative infinity all the way to positive infinity because we're going to use all the x value, all of the y values going upwards and all of the y values going downwards. Okay, so now, before I talk about the other two, I'm going to erase everything on my slide. Okay, so for these next problems, we are given an equation and we are told that the domain is -2, 4, and 9. We're looking for the range. Now remember, back to our original chart that we talked about at the beginning of the year, x and y went to the doctor. That means x is our domain and y is our range. So we're given x values. I'm going to start by making a table with this x values. I have -2, 4, and 9. And I'm trying to find what are the corresponding y values to these x values. So I don't want to do any work. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to my calculator. I'm going to go to y equals, and in y equals, I'm going to type my equation, negative 3x plus 4. Then I'm going to press second graph, and I'm going to look at these different x values. When x is negative 2, my table tells me y is 10. So I'm going to write 10 next to my negative 2. When x is 4, my table tells me my y is negative 8. So I'm going to write negative 8 next to my 4. And when x is 9, I have to scroll down to get to 9. My table tells me that my corresponding y is negative 23. And so what is the range? The range is 10, negative 8, and negative 23. Now the next problem. For y equals 4x plus 2, the range is 2, 6, and 14. What is the domain? So again, range is y and x, and domain is x. So I'm going to start by making a table because it's easier to see these problems with tables. My range is the y, so I'm going to write 2, 6, and 14 on the y-axis. And I'm looking for the corresponding x values. Now again, I don't want to do any work, so I'm just going to go to my calculator. I'm going to type in my equation, 4x plus 2. I'm going to go to my table, so second graph. And I'm looking at what is x when y is 2. So I'm going to scroll up. And here it is. When y is 2, my x is 0. So I'm going to put 0 next to the 2. When y is 6, and here it is, when y is 6, my x is 1. So I'm going to write 1 next to my x, next to my 6. And lastly, when the y is 14, right here, y is 14, my x is 3. So I'm going to write a 3 next to the 14. And so, what is the domain? The domain in this problem is going to be 0, 1, and 3. And now I am done. I have found domain and range.